And Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. And I am so grateful we have the Alzheimer's volunteers here. We have a great group in Tennessee. And there's some back there. Love seeing them. But you know, Mr. Secretary, the budget that you brought to us, it is full of things that get in the way of research. It would prevent new drugs and therapies from coming to market. It would weaken those IP protections. And it would expand big government, and it's something that does cost us some concern. I want to return to the issue of telework. I know that Senator Cassidy discussed this with you. Adding to the list of how many HHS employees are working telework, I would like for you to identify the essential and non-essential components of that list of those that are teleworking. And also looking at you and your team personally, when you look at telework, how many days have you spent in California during COVID-19?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. With regard to my status, I know that requests have been made for my schedule, and we will try to provide as much information
yes,
as we can.
I think it would be great if we were able to get the schedule for you, your security detail, and the records expense reports so that we could see how much. The reason this is important is because you are overseeing an agency that is the equivalent of a tenth of our nation's GDP. And I think that it is vital that you be on site in overseeing that department. So can you even ballpark how long you were in California and how often you were absent?
I don't get to California very often. When I do, it's usually because I'm doing work and I would travel.
During the pandemic, because I think it's important that during the pandemic that you were there.
Not
and
often.
I want to read this back to you. 2019, talking about the border crisis, you said of President Trump, and I quote, "And to say that it's an emergency, and then within 24 hours, having said it, go off to Florida to your Mar-a-Lago resort, when you think there is a national emergency, I think all the evidence, including what Donald Trump says and does, proves this is no national emergency," end quote. So by your own standard, you would equate COVID to not being a national emergency if you're spending those hours in California and being absent from the headquarters. It's time to get people back to work. Faith-based organizations. We have 8,000 faith-based organizations across the country that are irreplaceable members of the nation's child welfare system. Senator Ossoff and I are going to do some bipartisan work at Judiciary Committee on these issues. Tennessee relies heavily on faith-based agencies for services like foster care, adoption, different child and family services, and the recruitment of those adoptive families. Now, under your leadership, one of the first actions that HHS took was to rescind waivers issued by the previous administration, which allowed faith-based groups to place children with families in accordance with their sincerely held religious beliefs. The president's budget now proposes to combat sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination by penalizing foster care and adoption providers for operating in accordance with their tenets of faith. So, with nearly 400,000 children in the foster care system, would you not agree that placing those kids in loving homes is a greater priority than advancing an agenda?
Senator, thank you for the question. There is no doubt that being able to place any child who's in foster care in a loving home should be our top priority. And we want to make sure that that's always possible. We want to make sure laws are not violated that would prevent that child from going to a loving home.
Let's do this. Let's have you submit how many potential foster and adoptive homes would be forced out of the system if the president's budget were put into effect on that issue. I want to go back. I know Senator Menendez talked to you about the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and this department is responsible for the care and placement of unaccompanied children who come across the U.S. border, correct? And are you aware of the recent New York Times article that really reported on the large numbers of unaccompanied children who are being placed with exploitative sponsors and working long hours in dangerous conditions?
I'm aware of the fact that a number of children have been reported to be working in ways that are violating our law, but I'm not aware of the situation you mentioned about being placed in exploitative circumstances. So if you could clarify that a bit more.
I will be happy. Mr. Chairman, I'd love to submit that article for the record.
Without objection.
That is wonderful. Thank you for that. Now, the agency, the Times reported that under the Biden presidency, the agency cannot find 85,000 children, and that the agency lost contact with a third of the migrant children that are coming into the country. So I'd like to know what you're doing to find the children and what you're doing to make certain that these children are not being trafficked.
Senator, first, those statistics that you've mentioned, as I said previously in regards to another question by one of your colleagues, those are unfamiliar to me. I have no idea where those statistics come from, if they're based in reality or not. And we do everything we can to make sure any child, before we allow them to be released to a sponsor, that sponsor has been vetted.
Okay.
The vast majority of these children end up with a family member, immediate family member, as a placement. So some of those statistics that are being thrown out there that don't seem to be based in fact really would go contrary to what actually we've done.
Okay, my time is over, but let me tell you, we have to get this thing straightened out. At any time you had 10,500 children under your care, the money works out to about $1,400 a day to take care of these children, and you can't find these children. We have to get it straightened out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank my colleague. We're going to go to Senator Dink.